The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust that seemed to settle nowhere, just hung in the Arizona heat like a veil between Delilah Morgan and whatever awaited her in Superior. Through the small window, she watched the Superstition Mountains rise like jagged teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and she wondered if Cruelty came quick out here, or if it took its time. Her father's debts had sold her as surely as any auction block, though the papers called it a mail-order bride arrangement, and the man who had purchased her contract, one Silas Thornton, had a reputation that preceded him across 3 territories. The other passengers, a mining company clerk and an older woman in widow's weeds, had gone silent when Delilah mentioned her destination, and that silence told her everything she needed to know about the life waiting for her at the end of this dusty road. The year was 1879, and women like Delilah had few choices when their fathers drank away the family farm and died owing money to men who collected debts with interest that compounded like storm clouds. She was 22 years old, had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's green eyes, and possessed a stubborn streak that had kept her spine straight through 3 days of travel from Missouri to this God-forsaken corner of Arizona territory. The dress she wore had been her mother's, altered down after consumption had wasted that good woman to nothing, and it was the finest thing she owned, which meant it was hardly fine at all. Superior announced itself first with the smell of copper smelting, then with the sound of stamp mills crushing ore, and finally with the sight of buildings that looked thrown together by men who expected everything to be temporary. The stagecoach station sat next to a mercantile, both structures leaning slightly as if tired of standing upright in the heat. Delilah gathered her single carpet bag, thanked the driver with more grace than she felt, and stepped down into the street with her heart hammering against her ribs. A man detached himself from the shadow of the mercantile's porch, and Delilah's stomach dropped. He was massive, with a beard that had never met a comb and clothes that spoke of wealth extracted from the backs of others. His eyes traveled over her with the assessment of someone examining livestock, and when he smiled, his teeth showed gaps that made her think of a predator's grin. "You must be the Morgan girl," he said, not bothering with introductions. "Prettier than I expected. That will do fine." Delilah opened her mouth to respond, though she had no idea what words might come out when another voice cut through the afternoon heat. "Thornton, your mare threw a shoe. I got her reshod, but that front left leg has heat in it. You have been riding her too hard again." The man who spoke appeared from beside the stage station, leading a tall bay mare with one hand while removing his hat with the other. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with hair the color of wheat after harvest and eyes that caught the sun like creek water over stones. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a simple cotton shirt, both showing the honest wear of labor rather than the carelessness of neglect. When his gaze landed on Delilah, something in his expression shifted, a flicker of concern that came and went so fast she might have imagined it. "I did not pay you to lecture me about my horses, Walker," Thornton said, his voice carrying the edge of a man used to being obeyed. "Just keep them sound enough to ride. That is all I need from you." "Yes, sir," the cowboy Walker said quietly. He handed over the mare's reins, then tipped his hat to Delilah. "Madam." His voice was soft, almost apologetic, and then he was turning away, heading back toward what Delilah assumed were the stables. Thornton's hand closed around her elbow, and Delilah flinched despite herself. His grip was not gentle, steering her toward a wagon hitched to a team of mules. "Come along. Ranch is 6 miles out. You will be expected to earn your keep, understand? I need a woman to manage the house, cook for the hands, and provide whatever else a wife is meant to provide. The way he said that last part made Delilah's skin crawl. She climbed into the wagon seat, her carpetbag clutched in her lap like armor, and tried not to think about the stories she had heard about Silas Thornton. How his first wife had died under circumstances nobody wanted to discuss. How the men who worked for him feared him. How even the law in Superior gave him wide berth because his mining operation employed half the town. They rode in silence, Thornton occasionally spitting tobacco juice over the side of the wagon while Delilah watched the landscape roll past. The ranch, when they reached it, was larger than she expected. A sprawling operation with corrals and outbuildings scattered around a main house that had clearly been expanded multiple times without much concern for aesthetics. Chickens scattered as the wagon approached, and a dog barked once before thinking better of it and slinking away. "Stable your bag in the house," Thornton said, not bothering to help her down. "Then get yourself to the kitchen. The hands will want feeding at sundown, and I expect a decent meal, not the slop my last housekeeper tried to pass off as food." Delilah climbed down, her legs unsteady from travel and fear combined. The house was dim inside, all the curtains drawn against the heat, and it smelled of old tobacco and unwashed dishes. The kitchen was a disaster. Crusted pots in the dry sink and a cast iron stove that looked like it had never been properly cleaned. She found a mostly clean apron hanging on a peg, tied it over her dress, and assessed what ingredients were available. There was dried beef, potatoes, onions, and not much else. It would have to be enough. She was elbow-deep in potato peels when the kitchen door opened and the cowboy from town entered, hat in hand. Up close, she could see he had a scar along his jaw, faint but visible, and his hands were calloused in the way that spoke of years of rope and leather and hard work. "Sorry to disturb you, madam," he said, staying near the door as if afraid to intrude further. "Name is Josiah Walker. I am the foreman here, or close enough to one as Mr. Thornton keeps. Just wanted to introduce myself proper, and to tell you that if you need anything at all, you can ask me." Something in the way he said it, the emphasis on those last words, made Delilah look up from the potatoes. His eyes were kind, genuinely kind, and that kindness was so unexpected after Thornton's casual cruelty that she felt something tight in her chest begin to crack. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," she managed. "I am Delilah Morgan. Josiah, please. Nobody calls me Mr. Walker." He glanced toward the closed door that led to the rest of the house, then back to her. "I know this is not my place to say, madam, but you should know that you are not trapped here. If things get difficult, if you need help leaving, there are people in town who would assist. The preacher, Reverend Collins, he is a good man. The sheriff, too, though he and Thornton have their arrangements." Delilah's hand stilled in the wash bucket. "Why are you telling me this?" Josiah was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Because I saw your face when you stepped off that stage. You looked like someone heading to the gallows. And because Thornton's first wife, Mary, she was a kind woman who deserved better than what she got. I could not help her, but maybe I can help you if you need it." Before Delilah could respond, Thornton's voice bellowed from somewhere deeper in the house, calling for Josiah. The foreman flinched slightly, then settled his hat back on his head. "I should go. Remember what I said, Miss Morgan. You are not alone here, no matter how it might feel." Then he was gone, and Delilah was left staring at the closed door, tears she had not expected burning in her eyes. She had arrived expecting cruelty, had armored herself against violence and degradation. But this cowboy's gentle concern, his quiet offer of help, had breached her defenses more effectively than any harsh treatment could have. She wiped her eyes on her apron and returned to the potatoes, but something had shifted inside her, a small seed of hope taking root in barren soil. Dinner was served in silence, the ranch hands filing through the kitchen to fill their plates before carrying them outside to eat under the ramada. They were a rough crew, maybe 10 men total, all of them avoiding eye contact with Delilah in the way of men who knew better than to notice their boss's woman. Thornton ate at the table in the dining room alone and did not comment on the food one way or another. Josiah came through last, and when Delilah handed him his plate, their fingers brushed briefly. He met her eyes, gave a slight nod as if to say he meant what he had told her, and then he was gone. She cleaned the dishes in water she had to heat on the stove, her back aching and her hands raw by the time she finished. The house had gone dark except for lamplight in what she assumed was Thornton's study, and she stood in the kitchen wondering where she was meant to sleep. A small room off the kitchen turned out to be a servant's quarters, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained, but it had a door with a lock, and that was more than she had dared hope for. She had just changed into her nightdress when the door handle turned. Her heart stopped. The lock held, but Thornton's voice came through the wood, thick with whiskey and entitlement. "Open this door, wife. You have obligations to fulfill." "We are not married yet," Delilah said, amazed at how steady her voice remained. "The contract said there would be a proper ceremony." "The contract said you belonged to me," Thornton snarled. "The ceremony is just paperwork. Now open this door before I break it down." Delilah backed away until she hit the wall, her mind racing. She heard Thornton's weight hit the door once, twice, and then another voice cut through the night. "Sir, there is trouble with the south fence. Looks like someone has been cutting the wire. You will want to see this. Josiah." That was Josiah's voice, steady and urgent, drawing Thornton away from the door like a sheepdog redirecting a wolf. She heard Thornton curse, heard his heavy footsteps retreating, and then silence. Delilah sank onto the bed, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She stayed awake the entire night, her few possessions packed and ready, prepared to run if Thornton returned. He did not. When dawn grayed the window, she heard the sounds of men stirring, horses being saddled, Thornton shouting orders about checking the fences. She dressed quickly, returned to the kitchen, and started breakfast, moving through exhaustion by sheer will. The ranch hands filed through again, taking their plates without comment until Josiah appeared. "There was no trouble with the fence," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "But he rode out to check anyway, and he will be gone most of the morning. I thought you might appreciate the peace." This time, Delilah could not stop the tears. They came sudden and overwhelming, weeks of fear and grief and exhaustion pouring out all at once. Josiah set down his plate and did something unexpected. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and guided her gently into it, then took another chair and just sat with her while she cried. He did not try to shush her or tell her everything would be fine. He just sat there, a steady presence until the storm passed. "I am sorry," Delilah finally managed, wiping her face with her apron. "I should not burden you with this." "You are not a burden," Josiah said firmly, "and you have nothing to apologize for. What Thornton tried to do last night, that was wrong. You have every right to your tears and your fear." Delilah looked at him properly then, this cowboy who had twice now placed himself between her and harm. His face showed no expectation of gratitude or reward. He simply looked concerned, the way a decent human being should look when witnessing another's suffering. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "What do you gain from it?" Josiah leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "My mother used to say that kindness does not need a reason beyond itself. I work for Thornton because I need the wages, But that does not mean I have to approve of how he treats people, especially women, especially you." That last part hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cook stove. Josiah cleared his throat and stood, retrieving his plate. "I should get to work." "But Miss Morgan, Delilah, I meant what I said yesterday. You need help. You need anything at all, you come find me. I bunk in the foreman's quarters, the small cabin past the horse barn. My door is always open to you." He left before she could respond, and Delilah sat alone in the kitchen, pressing her hands to her hot cheeks and trying to understand the strange feeling blooming in her chest. Hope, yes, but also something else. Something that felt dangerously like attraction, which was the last thing she needed in her situation. The days fell into a pattern. Delilah cooked and cleaned, maintaining the house while avoiding Thornton as much as possible. He made a few more attempts to force himself into her room, but each time, Josiah appeared with some urgent ranch business that required immediate attention. The other hands noticed. She could tell from their sidelong glances and whispered conversations, but none of them commented. Josiah was well liked among the crew, and Thornton was feared but not respected. If the foreman wanted to protect the new housekeeper, the men were not going to interfere. 2 weeks after her arrival, Delilah was hanging laundry when Josiah rode up on a gray gelding, leading a pretty paint mare. "Can you ride?" he asked without preamble. "I grew up on a farm," Delilah said, shading her eyes to look up at him. "I rode our plow horses bareback." "Good." He swung down from his mount, nimble despite his height. "Thornton has gone into town for supplies, and he will be gone until evening. I thought you might like to see some of the ranch. Get away from this house for a few hours." Delilah looked at the remaining wet clothes in her basket, then back at Josiah's hopeful expression. The day was beautiful for Arizona in late summer, the heat not yet oppressive, and the thought of escaping the house's stifling walls was almost painfully appealing. "I should finish the laundry." "The laundry will wait. You need sunshine more than those sheets need drying." He held the paint mare steady, clearly prepared to wait until she made a decision. Delilah made it quickly. She ducked back into the house long enough to grab her bonnet and change into her sturdiest skirt, then emerged ready to ride. Josiah helped her onto the mare, his hands careful and respectful, and then they were off, riding away from the ranch buildings toward the open range beyond. The land out here was harsh but beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. Josiah led them along a creek that still held water despite the season, past stands of cottonwood trees that whispered in the hot breeze. He pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the ranch and the territory, his voice easy and companionable. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Delilah felt herself relax, the constant tension in her shoulders easing as they rode. They stopped to rest the horses in a small canyon where the creek widened into a pool, and Josiah pulled hardtack and dried apples from his saddlebag, offering her half. They ate in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle overhead. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said finally. "What happened to Mary Thornton?" Josiah's jaw tightened. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer, but finally he spoke. "She fell down the stairs, according to the official story. Broke her neck. But Mary was the most sure-footed woman I ever met, and those stairs are wide and well lit. The night before she died, I heard them arguing. Thornton's voice, mostly, saying things no man should say to his wife. In the morning, she was dead. And nobody investigated. Thornton owns the mine that keeps Superior alive. The sheriff owes his position to Thornton's support. There was an inquest, but it concluded exactly how Thornton wanted it to conclude. Josiah turned to look at her, his expression fierce. That is why I intervened that first night. I told myself I would never stand by again if Thornton tried to hurt another woman. I could not save Mary, but I can help you. Delilah's throat tightened. You could lose your job. Worse, if Thornton turned on you. Some things are worth losing a job over. He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. You are worth that risk, Delilah. The way he said her name, soft and certain, made something flutter in her chest. She had known this man barely 2 weeks, but in that time, he had shown her more genuine care than anyone had in years. Her father, lost in his bottles and his debts, had stopped seeing her as a daughter long before he sold her contract. The men back in Missouri had looked at her with either lust or pity, never simple human regard. But Josiah looked at her like she mattered, like her well-being was important for its own sake. I should not feel this way, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. Feel what way? She met his eyes, those clear creek water eyes, and decided honesty was worth the risk. Safe with you, valued, like maybe there is still kindness in the world. She paused, then pushed forward. Like maybe I want to know what it feels like to be held by someone who sees me as a person rather than property. Josiah drew in a sharp breath. Delilah, you are engaged to Thornton, even if not yet married. I would not compromise you, no matter how much I might want to. Her heart was racing now, hope and fear tangled together. He shifted closer, near enough that she could see the flecks of green and gold in his eyes. I have wanted to from the moment I saw you step off that stage, looking so brave despite your fear. You are beautiful, yes, but that is the least of it. You have a strength in you, a will to survive and even find joy in small moments. When you smile at something, even something as simple as fresh eggs in the henhouse, it lights up your whole face. I find myself looking for reasons to walk past the kitchen just to see if I can make you smile. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with poetry or practiced flattery, but with plain, honest truth that hit her straight in the heart. Josiah, she whispered. I know the situation is impossible, he continued, words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. I know you are bound by contract, and I am just a foreman who lives in a drafty cabin and probably always will be. I know I have no right to these feelings. But I have them anyway, and I thought you should know, just so you understand why I keep risking Thornton's anger to protect you. It is not just because it is the right thing to do, though it is. It is because the thought of him hurting you makes me want to do things that would get me hanged. Delilah reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his face. He froze, every muscle going still like a wild thing deciding whether to bolt or stay. The scar along his jaw was smooth under her fingertips. How did you get this? Breaking horses when I was younger and stupider. A bad-tempered roan gelding that caught me with a hoof. His voice had gone rough. Delilah, you should not touch me like that unless you mean it. I mean it, she said, and then she was leaning in and he was meeting her halfway and their lips touched soft and questioning. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Josiah's hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm infinitely tender, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. That was unwise, Josiah said, but he did not sound regretful. He sounded wondering, like a man who had just witnessed a miracle. Probably, Delilah agreed. But I am tired of wisdom. Wisdom got me sold to Silas Thornton. Maybe it is time I trusted my heart instead of my head. Your heart could get us both killed. Then we will die having known something real, even if just for a moment. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I do not know how this can possibly work, Josiah. I am legally bound to Thornton, and he is not a man who will let me go easily. but I know that what I feel when I am with you is the first true thing I have felt in years. That has to count for something." They sat there by the creek, hands clasped, until the sun began its descent and they had to return to the ranch before Thornton came back from town. As they rode, Josiah was already planning. Delilah could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the horizon as if calculating distances and possibilities. "There might be a way," he said as they approached the ranch buildings. "It would be risky and we would need help, but there might be a way to break your contract legally." "How?" "The contract is contingent on marriage, correct? You become Thornton's property through the marriage vows. But if we could prove coercion, or if you could demonstrate just cause for breaking the agreement before the ceremony, a judge might void it. Judge Hartford in Phoenix is known to be fair-minded. He has ruled against mining companies before when they mistreated workers." "Phoenix is over 60 miles away. How would I even get there? And Thornton would never let me leave, which is where the risky part comes in." Josiah helped her down from the mare, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Let me think on it. Talk to some people. Just promise me you will be careful around Thornton. Do not give him any reason to escalate before we have a plan." Delilah promised, though she wondered how much longer she could avoid Thornton's advances. The man's patience was clearly wearing thin, and Josiah could not manufacture ranch emergencies forever. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed with the door locked, she allowed herself to dream of a future that did not end in violence or despair. A future that somehow included a cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands, who looked at her like she was precious. The next week tested that hope severely. Thornton, frustrated by repeated interruptions, started watching Josiah with suspicion. He began assigning the foreman tasks that took him far from the ranch house, sometimes for entire days. Without Josiah's protection, Delilah had to be constantly vigilant. She took to carrying a kitchen knife in her apron pocket and pushed a chair under her door handle at night in addition to the lock. Thornton cornered her in the pantry on a Tuesday afternoon, his bulk blocking the doorway. "You have been here a month, girl. I am done waiting for a ceremony. Tonight, you will come to my room or I will drag you there. Understand? I understand you are a brute who has to force women because none would have you willingly," Delilah said, her hand closing around the knife handle in her pocket. Fear made her reckless, and she was so tired of being afraid. Thornton's face went purple. He lunged for her, and Delilah pulled the knife, holding it between them with a shaking hand. "Touch me and I will cut you. I swear I will." They stood frozen, and then hoofbeats sounded in the yard, several riders coming in fast. Thornton cursed and shoved past her, heading outside to see what the commotion was. Delilah sagged against the pantry shelf, dizzy with adrenaline and relief. The riders turned out to be a marshal and 2 deputies from Phoenix, and they had come to arrest Thornton. Delilah listened from the kitchen as the marshal read charges: fraud related to the mine operation, theft of ore from a neighboring claim, and conspiracy to commit violence against a rival mining company. Thornton blustered and threatened, but the marshal was unimpressed. Within an hour, Thornton was in shackles, being loaded onto a horse for the long ride to Phoenix to face trial. Josiah appeared in the kitchen doorway as the riders disappeared down the road, Delilah rushing into his arms without thinking. He caught her, holding her tight while she shook. "Is this real? Is he really gone?" "He is really gone. The trial will take months, and given the evidence, he will likely hang or spend the rest of his life in territorial prison." Josiah pulled back enough to see her face, his expression both relieved and worried. "But Delilah, your contract still exists. The law might see you as part of Thornton's property, to be liquidated with his other assets to pay his legal fees and debts. The relief curdled into fresh fear. So I am not free. I have just traded one owner for a legal system that will sell me to whoever bids highest. No, Josiah said firmly. No, that is not going to happen. I already sent word to Judge Hartford, laid out your situation. He is sympathetic, but you will need to travel to Phoenix to testify before him and request the contract's dissolution. I will take you there myself. We can leave tomorrow if you are willing. What about the ranch? The hands? Thornton's assets are frozen during the trial, which means nobody is getting paid anyway. The hands will scatter, find work elsewhere. I already told them they were free to go. He hesitated, then continued. I have some savings. Enough to buy supplies for the journey and maybe set us up for a few months while we figure out what comes next. If you will have me, that is. If you want to build a future together, not because any contract says so, but because we choose it. Delilah looked at this man who had risked everything to protect her, who had shown her that gentleness and strength could exist in the same person. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. They left before dawn the next morning, just the two of them on horseback with supplies packed on a mule. The ranch sat empty behind them, already taking on the abandoned look of places that had been built without love. The ride to Phoenix took 4 days, following roads that ranged from poor to nearly non-existent. They camped under the stars, Josiah always the gentleman, laying out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. But each night they talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives and dreams for the future. Delilah learned that Josiah had been orphaned at 12, raised by an older brother who had died in a mining accident when Josiah was 18. He had been working cattle and breaking horses ever since, moving from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. I think maybe home is not a place, he said one night, firelight dancing across his face. Maybe it is a person, and maybe I have been searching for you all along without knowing it. She told him about her mother, who had loved books and taught Delilah to read despite her father's objections that education was wasted on girls. About the farm that had been beautiful once, before debt and alcohol had destroyed it. About feeling invisible for so long that she had started to believe she actually was, that her wants and needs and dreams did not matter to anyone. They matter to me, Josiah said fiercely. Every single one of them matters to me. Phoenix was larger than Superior, a real town with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. Judge Hartford heard Delilah's case in his chambers, listening with a grave expression as she described the circumstances that had brought her west. Josiah testified as well, detailing Thornton's attempted assaults and the atmosphere of fear at the ranch. The judge asked pointed questions, took notes, and finally leaned back in his chair. Miss Morgan, your contract was signed under duress, you being presented with no viable alternative to avoid debtor's prison for your late father's obligations. Additionally, Mr. Thornton breached the terms by attempting to claim conjugal rights before any legal marriage was performed. I am nullifying this contract as of this moment. You are free to go where you wish and live as you choose. Delilah had been prepared for legal maneuvering, for delays and bureaucratic nonsense. The simple declaration of freedom left her speechless. Josiah's hand found hers under the desk, squeezing gently, and that touch grounded her enough to find her voice. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. Outside the courthouse, Delilah stood blinking in the bright Arizona sun, officially free for the first time since her father's death. Josiah was grinning at her, and she found herself grinning back, giddy with relief and possibility. So, Josiah said, what does a newly free woman want to do with her life? First, Delilah said. "She wants to marry a cowboy if he is still offering. He is absolutely still offering. Though he should warn you that he is not a wealthy man and the life he can offer will be simple. I do not want wealth. I want honesty and kindness and a partnership built on respect. Can you offer those things?" "Every day for the rest of my life," Josiah promised. They were married the next afternoon by a Presbyterian minister, with Judge Hartford and his wife standing as witnesses. Delilah wore her mother's dress, and Josiah bought a new shirt for the occasion, and it was the simplest ceremony imaginable, but when they exchanged vows, Delilah felt the truth of them settling into her bones. This was what marriage was supposed to be: two people choosing each other freely, promising to weather whatever storms came together. Their wedding night was spent in a modest hotel room, and if Delilah had feared that intimacy might prove difficult after her experiences with Thornton's violence, Josiah proved her wrong. He was patient and tender, asking permission before every touch, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When she wept afterward, it was not from pain or fear but from overwhelming relief at discovering that physical love could be beautiful when shared with the right person. "I will never hurt you," Josiah whispered into her hair as they lay tangled together. "I promise you that, Delilah. I will spend every day earning your trust. You already have it," she told him. "You have had it since that first moment in Thornton's kitchen when you offered help without expecting anything in return." They stayed in Phoenix for a week while Josiah looked for work. His reputation as a skilled horseman and ranch foreman had preceded him, and he was quickly hired by a rancher named Thomas Whitmore, who ran cattle operation north of the city. The pay was fair, and Whitmore offered them a small house on the ranch property, a two-room cabin that was clean and sturdy and theirs. The work was hard but honest. Josiah was often up before dawn and did not return until after sunset, but he never came home without a smile for Delilah, never treated her as anything less than an equal partner. She tended a vegetable garden, kept chickens, and took in sewing from neighboring ranches to earn extra money. The life was simple, sometimes monotonous, but it was theirs, built on foundations of mutual respect and growing love. 6 months after their wedding, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Josiah one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, already talking about cribs and baby clothes, and how he would teach their child to ride. "What if I am not a good mother?" Delilah asked quietly, old fears surfacing. "What if I repeat my father's mistakes?" "You will not," Josiah said with absolute certainty. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know, Delilah. Our child will be loved beyond measure. And you will not be doing this alone. I will be right there beside you, every step." Their son was born on a spring morning in 1881, coming into the world squalling and healthy. They named him Samuel, after Josiah's brother, and from the moment Delilah held that tiny warm weight against her chest, she understood a love she had never imagined possible. Josiah proved to be a natural father, patient with middle-of-the-night cries, endlessly fascinated by every small development, from Samuel's first smile to his first tooth. The months blurred into years. Samuel grew from infant to toddler to a bright boy who followed his father everywhere, mimicking Josiah's walk and trying to wear his hat. Delilah's garden flourished, her sewing business expanded, and she discovered she had a talent for healing, neighbors coming to her for poultices and tinctures when they were sick. Josiah was promoted to ranch manager, earning enough that they could save money and begin planning for the future. When Samuel was 4, Delilah became pregnant again, and this time she delivered twin girls, red-faced and tiny and utterly perfect. They named them Rose and Clara, and Samuel took his role as big brother with utmost seriousness, always wanting to help feed them or rock their cradles. The cabin became crowded with 5 people instead of 2, but it was a good kind of crowded, full of laughter and noise and life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Josiah surprised Delilah with a land deed. He had been saving secretly, and he had purchased 160 acres of range land an hour's ride to the west. It was rough country, still wild, but there was water and grass, and he had a vision for their own ranch, a place they could build together and pass down to their children. "I know it is a risk," he said, watching her face anxiously. "And it will mean years of hard work before we see profit. But I want to build something that is ours, Delilah, something we can be proud of." Delilah looked at the deed, then at her husband's hopeful expression, then at their children playing in the yard. She thought about the terrified girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Superior 6 years earlier, expecting nothing but cruelty and pain. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this man who had shown her what real love looked like. "Yes," she said, "let us build something beautiful together." They moved to their own land that fall, living in a tent while Josiah and hired workers constructed a proper house. It was smaller than Thornton's ranch house had been, but infinitely warmer, designed with care and filled with love from the first nail. Delilah planted fruit trees and a larger garden. Josiah started their herd with 20 head of cattle purchased with the last of their savings. The work was back-breaking, the setbacks frequent, but they faced each challenge as partners, neither one bearing the load alone. Samuel started school in the small town that had sprung up 5 miles from their ranch, riding in each morning with his father and other ranch children. The twins were still too young for formal education, but Delilah taught them their letters and numbers, reading to them every night from the small library she had slowly accumulated. She thought often of her own mother, who had loved books, and felt like she was honoring that memory by passing the gift of literacy to her daughters. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Josiah proved to have an eye for good cattle, building a herd known for its quality. Delilah's healing work expanded, and eventually, the town council approached her about serving as the community's official midwife and nurse, offering a small salary. She accepted, proud to be contributing not just to her family's welfare but to the community's as well. Years rolled past, marked by the steady rhythms of ranch life. Calving seasons and brandings, summer droughts and winter snows, birthdays and holidays and quiet evenings on the porch. Samuel grew tall and serious, showing his father's gentle strength. The twins developed distinct personalities. Rose was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and catching frogs, while Clara was thoughtful and artistic, spending hours drawing the ranch animals and desert wildflowers. When Delilah turned 30, Josiah organized a surprise party, inviting all their neighbors and friends. As she looked around at the gathered crowd, at the community they had become part of, at her 3 healthy children and her husband who still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, she felt almost dizzy with gratitude. How close she had come to a completely different life. How easily she might have been broken by Silas Thornton's cruelty instead of saved by Josiah's kindness. "What are you thinking?" Josiah asked, sliding an arm around her waist as the party continued around them. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Delilah said honestly. "And that I love you more now than I did the day we married, which I would not have thought possible." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Josiah said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You made me believe in good things again, Delilah. You and our children, this ranch, this life we have built. Sometimes I wake up afraid it is all a dream. It is real, Delilah assured him. Every bit of it is real. She found out she was pregnant again at 32, a surprise after assuming their family was complete. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Delilah was often exhausted and ill. Josiah was unfailingly attentive, taking over household tasks without complaint, making sure she rested. Their neighbors rallied too, bringing meals and helping with the children, demonstrating the kind of community support that had become typical of their little corner of Arizona. The baby, another son, was born in the spring of 1890. They named him Jacob, and he had his father's eyes from the very beginning, that same Clear Creek water gaze that had made Delilah feel safe when she needed it most. Samuel, now 12, was gentle with his baby brother. The twins, at 8, were fascinated and slightly puzzled by the tiny creature who did little but eat and sleep. As Jacob grew, Delilah sometimes caught herself watching Josiah with their children and marveling at the kind of father he was. Patient when they made mistakes, generous with praise, never raising his hand in anger even when frustrated. He was everything her own father had not been, and she saw the confidence it built in their children, the security of knowing they were loved unconditionally. The ranch prospered. By the time Samuel was 15, they ran 200 head of cattle and had hired 3 permanent hands to help with the work. Josiah began teaching Samuel the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over. The twins were involved too, both proving to be excellent riders, helping with the horses and smaller tasks around the ranch. Even young Jacob, at 5, insisted on having chores, though his mainly involved feeding chickens and collecting eggs. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1891, their little town celebrated with a parade and picnic. Josiah was asked to speak at the ceremony, his reputation as an honest businessman and fair employer having earned respect throughout the region. Delilah stood in the crowd with their children, bursting with pride as her husband talked about the values that had built their community. Hard work, integrity, and treating others with dignity regardless of their circumstances. After the speech, an older woman approached Delilah. "Your husband is a good man," she said. "My daughter worked as a maid for Silas Thornton before you arrived. She told me how Mr. Walker, as he was then, always treated the help with respect, unlike his employer. I am glad he found happiness. You both deserve it." The mention of Thornton sent a small chill through Delilah, even after so many years. She had heard through the grapevine that he had been convicted and hanged for his crimes in 1882. The ranch in Superior had been sold to pay his debts, and as far as she knew, the new owners ran it with far more humanity. Still, the memory of those weeks in his household sometimes surfaced in nightmares, and she would wake gasping. Josiah always knew without her having to say anything. He would gather her close, murmuring reassurances until her heartbeat slowed. "You are safe," he would say. "I have got you. Nothing will hurt you while I am here." And she believed him because he had proved it true every single day of their marriage. Samuel left for university in Phoenix when he turned 18, planning to study agriculture and animal husbandry before returning to help run the ranch. His departure left a hole in the family, but Delilah was proud of him for pursuing education, for wanting to bring new knowledge back to improve their operation. The twins were 16 now, both beautiful young women who had their mother's determination and their father's kind hearts. Rose was courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a nice boy who treated her well, while Clara had announced her intention to become a teacher, already helping at the town school. Jacob, at 10, was their surprise joy, still young enough to need his parents but old enough to be genuinely helpful around the ranch. He had inherited both his father's way with horses and his mother's healing touch, equally comfortable gentling a skittish colt or bandaging a scraped knee. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Josiah arranged for the children to spend the night with neighbors so he and Delilah could have the house to themselves. They sat on the porch as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the land they had built together stretching out in all directions. 20 years, Delilah mused. Sometimes it feels like we have been together forever, and sometimes it feels like we just met. I remember the first moment I saw you, Josiah said. Stepping off that stage looking like you were facing a firing squad but refusing to show fear. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I was terrified. I know. That is what made your courage so remarkable. He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. I have never regretted a single day with you, Delilah. Not the hard times or the scary times or the times when we barely had enough money for flour. Every bit of it has been worth it because I got to live it with you. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she had 20 years earlier. I was so certain I was heading toward nothing but pain and misery. And then you showed up with your gentle hands and your kind eyes, and you made me believe that good men actually existed. You saved me, Josiah. We saved each other, he corrected gently. I was drifting before I met you, just going through motions. You gave me purpose, Delilah. You gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just existing day to day. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity. Two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own, who had learned over 20 years exactly how to bring each other pleasure and comfort. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Delilah thought about that terrified girl on the stagecoach and wished she could somehow send a message back through time. Hold on. The cowboy's gentle touch will make you weep, but they will be tears of relief and joy, not pain. Everything you are enduring is leading you toward a love bigger and better than you can imagine. The years continued their steady march. Samuel returned from university with a wife, a sweet girl named Margaret who took to ranch life with enthusiasm. They moved into a house Josiah and the hands built on the eastern section of the property, close enough to help with the main ranch but far enough for independence. Rose married her rancher's son in a beautiful outdoor ceremony, and they took over his family's operation when his parents retired. Clara got her teaching certificate and took a position at the school, boarding with a family in town during the week and coming home on weekends. Jacob, growing into young manhood, showed every sign of becoming as fine a man as his father. At 16, he was already 6 feet tall, with the quiet confidence that came from being raised with love and respect. He had a gift for healing animals that was almost uncanny, and neighbors often brought sick livestock to him rather than the veterinarian in town. Delilah turned 45 in 1899, and Josiah was 48. They had been married 24 years, had 4 children and 2 grandchildren from Samuel and Margaret, with another on the way. The ranch covered 500 acres now, one of the largest operations in the region. But for all their material success, what Delilah treasured most was simpler. The way Josiah still brought her wildflowers picked on his morning rides, the sound of grandchildren laughing on the porch, the knowledge that she had built a family free from fear and full of love. She was in the garden one afternoon when a woman drove up in a buggy, a stranger who asked if she was speaking to Delilah Morgan Walker. At Delilah's cautious confirmation, the woman introduced herself as a journalist from a Phoenix newspaper, writing a series on pioneer women who had helped build Arizona. "I have heard remarkable things about you," the journalist said. how you came west under difficult circumstances but built a successful life, how you serve as a midwife and healer for this entire region, how you and your husband created a model ranch operation. I would love to tell your story if you are willing to share it." Delilah's first instinct was to refuse. She had never sought attention or acclaim, preferring to live quietly and focus on her family and community. But then she thought about other women who might be trapped in situations like the one she had faced, women who might need to hear that escape was possible, that cruel circumstances did not have to define your entire life. So she agreed, and over several visits, she told the journalist about her journey. Not all of it, she kept some things private, like the specific details of Thornton's attempted assaults, but enough to paint a picture of transformation from victim to survivor to thriver. Josiah was interviewed as well, speaking about the importance of treating women as partners rather than property, about building a marriage on mutual respect. When the article was published, it caused more of a stir than Delilah had anticipated. Letters arrived from across the territory, many from women thanking her for her honesty, sharing their own stories of hardship and eventual triumph. A few were from women still trapped in difficult situations, asking for advice. Delilah answered every single letter, offering what guidance and encouragement she could. The attention made Josiah protective, worried that Delilah's past might be dredged up in hurtful ways. But mostly, people were kind, their neighbors proud that someone from their community had been recognized. The article brought unexpected practical benefits too. A women's college in California invited Delilah to speak about frontier medicine, offering to pay travel expenses and a speaking fee. She accepted, and Josiah accompanied her on what became their first real vacation, a week in San Francisco that felt impossibly cosmopolitan after decades of ranch life. They stood on the beach at sunset, watching waves crash against the shore, and Delilah laughed at how far she had come from that frightened girl on a stagecoach. "If someone had told me then that I would one day stand on a beach in California with my husband of 25 years, having just given a lecture to college students, I would have thought they were insane." "You have always been extraordinary," Josiah said. "You just needed the freedom and safety to let it show." Back home, life settled into comfortable rhythms again. Samuel's children were growing, already learning to ride and help with ranch chores. Rose visited regularly with her husband, and Clara brought her students on field trips to learn about ranch life. Jacob, now 20, was being courted by a doctor's daughter from town, a smart young woman who seemed genuinely interested in frontier medicine. Delilah suspected a wedding was in their future and found herself already planning. When the new century dawned in 1900, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate. 3 generations under one roof, children ranging from toddlers to young adults, everyone healthy and thriving. They stood outside at midnight, watching fireworks from town light up the distant sky, and Delilah felt Josiah's arm around her waist, solid and reassuring as always. "A new century," he said quietly. "Wonder what it will bring." "Whatever comes, we will face it together," Delilah replied. "Just like we have faced everything else." And they did. The early 1900s brought change to Arizona. Automobiles began appearing on roads that had only known horses and wagons. Telephone lines connected previously isolated communities. The ranch had to adapt, but Josiah and Samuel proved adept at balancing tradition with innovation, maintaining what worked while embracing improvements that made sense. Delilah continued her healing work, though she trained younger women to gradually take over, knowing she could not do it forever. She and Josiah began talking about eventually retiring, maybe building a smaller house and turning the main ranch over to Samuel. But there was no rush. They were both still healthy and active, still enjoying their work and life. Jacob married the doctor's daughter, Hannah, in a ceremony that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. Watching her youngest son exchange vows with a woman he clearly adored, she thought about the contrast with her own first intended marriage. Jacob and Hannah were a true partnership, both passionate about healing and helping others. They planned to set up a medical practice in town, serving the growing community's needs. On a warm evening in 1905, with the ranch thriving and all their children happily settled, Delilah and Josiah took their customary places on the porch. 30 years had passed since that desperate girl had stepped off a stagecoach in Superior, expecting nothing but cruelty. 30 years of building a life neither of them could have imagined back then. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Delilah asked, not for the first time. "If I had not been bound for Thornton, we might never have met. You could have found an easier woman to love, one who did not come with so much trauma and complication." Josiah turned to face her, his hands framing her face with the same gentleness he had shown from the very beginning. His hair was gray now, and lines marked his face, but his eyes were the same clear creek water that had made her feel safe 3 decades earlier. "I would not change a single moment," he said firmly. "Not the fear or the risk or the hard times. All of it brought me to you, and you are worth every second. You hear me, Delilah? You have always been worth it." She kissed him then, tasting salt from tears she had not realized she was crying. Happy tears, grateful tears, the tears of someone who had been saved not just from a cruel man but from a life without love. Josiah's gentle touch had made her weep that first day in Thornton's kitchen, and it still did, but now the tears came from joy rather than despair. They sat together, as the sun set over land they had built into something beautiful. 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and created a legacy that would extend through generations. 4 children, 8 grandchildren so far, and a ranch that stood as testimony to what could be built when 2 people chose partnership and respect over dominance and fear. As darkness fell and stars began appearing in the vast Arizona sky, Delilah rested her head on Josiah's shoulder and thought about all the women who had written to her, all the people who had found hope in her story. She hoped they understood the true message. That one person's kindness could change everything, that gentleness was a form of strength, and that even in the cruelest circumstances, love could take root and flourish. The years ahead would bring more change, more challenges, and eventually the natural sorrows of aging and loss. But that night, sitting on their porch with the man who had saved her by simply seeing her as human, Delilah was perfectly content. She had arrived expecting cruelty and found tenderness instead. She had braced for pain and discovered joy. She had prepared to merely survive and instead had built a life worth celebrating. And when she finally closed her eyes for sleep that night, Josiah's hand still clasped in hers, Delilah Morgan Walker smiled, knowing without question that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The frightened girl from the stagecoach had become a confident woman, a healer, a mother and grandmother, a partner in every sense of the word. But more than any of those roles, she was loved, truly and deeply loved, by a cowboy whose gentle touch had taught her that happy endings were not just the stuff of fairy tales. Sometimes, against all odds and despite cruel beginnings, they were real. And they were worth every tear shed along the way.